Good afternoon. My name is Rai Gubaks, and I welcome you to this discussion session from the three breakout sessions this late morning. To my right, I have Karen König, and she is from the breakout session Anti-Discrimination and Diversity. And on my left is Karen Schoenwelder from the breakout session Political Participation. And directly to my left is Doris Peschke from Policies on Human Rights and Refugees. And I would like you to invite you to give some comments about the discussions in your breakout session, to give us some idea of the flavor of the ambience of your debate. Maybe I can start with you, Karen.
Okay. Yeah, this may now be unfair to the range of speakers and everyone contributing to this group, because it's always impossible to give you a complete picture of what we've done. I've just comment on a couple of aspects. I think generally the MIPEX index with regard to political participation directs our attention to selected aspects that are particularly important for the participation of non-EU nationals, as this is the overall focus, and on state intervention and the role of state policies for creating the room for political participation and granting some, in fact, very limited support for political activities. Now, of course, the spectrum of political activities, of political participation, or if you like, political incorporation of immigrants is much broader, although Tim Reeskens showed us, he's there at the back with data from the European Social Survey, that in fact the MIPEX index seems to capture relevant indicators, as the research group found that a couple of aspects of political participation that they are linked to the scores the countries get in the MIPEX index. So that seems to capture it well, and also it seems to capture forms of political participation that are actually not the subject of the index itself, as the index doesn't measure whether immigrants are in fact participating in important organizations, in political parties, in trade unions, etc. And if we want to assess how far advanced political opportunities, political equality is for immigrants, then we would, of course, have to look at all these different organizations and forms of activity. And we found that many things are under-researched. We know very little about equality of immigrants from civil society organizations, take Amnesty, take Greenpeace, whatever. What role do immigrants play there over trade unions to political parties? What we know more about recently is parliamentary representation of immigrants. And here I, commented on the German situation, and I'm going to reduce it to that and just say that what we can see here is progress on all levels. We do see immigrants appearing on the political stage, not only Mehmet Kilic in the Bundestag, but many more in the federal state parliaments and in city councils. Actually, in city councils, we have a steep increase of immigrant representation. So progress here, progress with some astonishing features. We talked about a particularly high representation of women. Immigrants are better there than the population overall, with a relative share of women, and a particularly high representation of people of Turkish background, who are also, among those part of this encouraging picture, I think, of a huge number of people with immigrant backgrounds who want to be political influential and who want to be a part of the political scenery and of the bodies that exercise political power. and encouraging also that some not only want to be active and influential, but that they overcome the existing barriers. Now, how does that relate to the state interventions the MIPEX index focuses on, like local voting rights, political rights, and funding for immigrant organizations? Now, obviously, political rights granted are very important. That's probably without questions. I think we had some discussion about the relevance of local voting rights, and I think maybe the general picture is they are a very important symbolic gesture. They maybe do increase participation overall, maybe also immigrant representation in parliaments. I'm looking at Laure because she has worked on this with regard to the Netherlands and France. Of course, only the Netherlands have local voting rights. Maybe they also encourage the political parties to take the issue more seriously. So they have an indirect effect. But we are maybe a bit disappointed about the levels of actual participation achieved so far. Also in Germany, as far as we know, the participation in elections of EU citizens is far lower than that of citizens overall, although you could say, well, even if it's only 20-30% who participate, that's better than nothing. But maybe in terms of state intervention here, we have to say, okay, there is a right granted, but very little is being done so far to actually encourage people to take up this right and to do something with these opportunities granted. I think the parties at the moment are very uninterested in this potential of EU voters and don't do much to put them on their candidate lists, etc. Funding for immigrant organizations could, of course, also be of extreme help. Well, my personal view here is, I'm not sure whether we disagree here, is that there is very little at the moment in terms of funding for immigrant organizations, but also I take this as a confirmation of a multiculturalism approach, actually. Often that, I would argue, I think here with the MIPEX index probably, that what it does, the funding for immigrant organizations, gives people the opportunity to develop their independent activities and creates opportunities for the development of a political elite. And it also brings people who are newcomers to the country in touch with the existing political structures and with political actors and state actors they have to negotiate with about funding, about projects they have, etc. So you potentially become familiar with political structures, and this makes it easier then to move on into political activity. This is an argument I get from Irene Blomrath, who's done this for Canada, but I think this would also explain why the Netherlands perform relatively well in terms of political representation and, well, shows us some positive effects of multiculturalism after all. And, well, maybe the last note is that if we want encouragement of political participation, political equality for immigrants, then much more needs to be done. At the moment, we largely have acceptance of immigrant participation. We have in Germany the parties, the big Volksparteien at last opening up to the issue following the path the Green Party has taken much earlier, and the left has also taken opening up for immigrant candidates, but that's surely not enough. We don't have any massive campaigns for citizenship, for participation, for equal representation of immigrants, and without some more deliberate intervention, probably the situation will not continue to improve as rapidly as it has done on this low level where it is now.
Thank you, Karen. Doris, would you like to continue?
I'm trying my best. It's also not entirely easy after quite a wide range of discussions. we started off by saying with Pro Asyl that on the refugees, which were part of our theme, of course, refugee issues, integration is currently not top priority because access to protection is a priority, and finding equality of access to protection within and among EU member states. So in terms of priorities, integration is not very high on the refugee protection agenda. I contradicted that a little bit by saying that the UNHCR and the UN Convention also provides for integration as being the durable solution, or one of the 3 durable solutions for protection. But in terms of policy approach, it's of course right in the EU that currently other issues are priority. What we then also said very clearly from the refugee and asylum perspective is that integration in principle should start as early as possible, while our policies currently delay integration and interventions and programs. So access to labour market is not available for asylum applicants at a very early stage in most countries, and these issues are not captured also in the labour market statistics of MIPEX. So while they somewhere feature in the overall statistics, this is not explicitly pronounced. While there are some regional studies which really clearly show that if integration measures are there at the beginning and very early, then people do better, never mind which decision in the end is taken. Even if they had to return, it has been proven that those who had access to some sort of training and gaining competences also then had a better start when they returned to another country. So these issues perhaps could be looked at in more detail of the effects of such measures. We have said very clearly that the rights-based approach in the MIPEX is a very useful tool. However, we were also reminded that some countries might feel quite comfortable in the place in the ranking, like Selma from the Czech Republic, who said the Czech government is very happy to be right in the middle. They wouldn't like to be among the best. They wouldn't like to be among the worst. The middle is just the best place to be. So no criticism from the right, no criticism from the left, just the place to be. So in terms of competition among EU member states, one also has to be a bit aware of what that may do in terms of policy approaches. I think that was an important reminder to us. And then we had the question of vulnerable groups and also ethnic diversity in societies, which is not captured with the indicators, like the Roma exclusion, which they are citizens, so some of the aspects of citizenship, naturalization do not apply. Family reunification doesn't apply in principle. So how do we get also the fragmentation in societies more into the picture in the integration discourse without saying that this is not relevant? For many it is, but in some societies the Roma inclusion is much more of an issue than the migrants' integration, also in terms of percentage of persons affected. The refugees, asylum seekers have different categories, and because of the different status and rights attached to the status, we have a huge diversity in Europe on what this actually also means for coming to an integrated approach. We also discussed the issue of undocumented persons who are not covered at all, while at the same time they will try to be as invisible as possible and therefore know quite a lot about the country and the situation where they are. And the risk also of increasing statelessness by undocumented persons not registering their children. So that is a new feature and a new area of vulnerability which perhaps we sometimes overlook also in this discourse. What personally I feel important is that we look also at the different rights we talk about. In the 7 indicators, we talk about 3 fundamental rights: the right to family life, the right to education, and also anti-discrimination, as ranking differently to long-term residence, to political participation, labor access, and nationality. And if these are used as indicators for integration, there is the risk that these application of rights and how good or bad persons achieve them, then also fundamental rights are made dependent to integration success. So that is a risk which needs to be addressed, particularly for more vulnerable groups, so that language acquisition is made a condition for family reunification should not apply to the core family. I mean, things like that, I think, need to be stated quite clearly again. And also the issue which has been mentioned yesterday, but how do we link to the mainstream society and the expectations so that migrants do not always need to be better than others in society, because that will also increase the fears in societies of being no longer able to compete with very qualified migrants. So how can one come to a bit more normal being together? That is perhaps one of the conclusion remarks.
Thank you, Doris. And then we turn to our last commentator, Karen.
Thank you. I was on the panel on anti-discrimination and diversity policies, and we started out actually by getting a reminder of the very recent basis in the EU treaty that this area of legislation has, by Mr. Bashi Qureshi, who was our moderator, and he reminded us that this was a result of the Amsterdam Treaty and only in the late 90s. And the directives from 2000 are now implemented in all countries, and all have now anti-discrimination legislation, which is a big step forward. And this is why we could look into that matter in the MIPEX. And then Mrs. Dien Nguyen Do gave us an overview of the MIPEX. She's from the Migration Policy Group, the results in the anti-discrimination field. And actually showed us where the weaknesses and the strengths are, where the areas are where there could be easily made progress. And she laid out the structure of the MIPEX in that field, which is a rather transparent one, also like in all the other fields. It deals about definitions and concepts. It deals with fields of application, enforcement mechanisms, and equality policies. Mr. Andreas Hieronymus from the Institute for Migration and Racism Forschung in Hamburg also gave us insight in our shadow reporting, where the state reports that report about measures in the anti-discrimination field by states is actually trying to fill in the gaps, what is missing in the reports, and to really make a good comment on the reality in the states, because sometimes legislation looks very nice, but reality is very different. And my part was from the side of the city of Vienna, talking about relating actually to the results for Austria, which are rather bad, not only in the anti-discrimination field, but in all fields. And unfortunately, I can very well relate to these results. They are very appropriate and correct. But I tried, and I actually said that I'm very glad about the approach of the MIPEX, because it really looks at the structural responsibilities, the structural duties by the states, and shifts away from the cultural approach that is very often being in the public debate, very much so in Austria. And this is a very strong support for our public debate, in my opinion, and supports me and also the city of Vienna in its different approach of really looking at structural barriers and obstacles and how they can be removed. I think that's very, very important. And from the part of the federal, states in Austria, because we have a federalist structure, it may be useful in my opinion, to also look at these structures and also the legislation that is in place there, because it might actually change the picture a bit. We have 8 provinces in Austria, not only the national state. 9 provinces, sorry, left out Vienna. So 9, and all of them have their own legislation. And this legislation goes a bit beyond the state legislation. This is interesting. And then also, of course, in the fields of practices and measures, diversity policies, quite a lot is going on there. I elaborated a bit on the diversity policies of Vienna that we have established in 2004. A structural expression of those diversity policies is the establishment of Municipal Department for Integration and Diversity, where I work for. And this department has the role to assist the whole administration, all its departments, in kind of checking, examining whether services are really delivered in an equally accessible way to all, regardless of ethnic origin, of course, especially ethnic origin, religion, and so forth. So what we are kind of trying to do is give support and give assistance, and also change the workforce, encourage people to work with the city of Vienna, and to look at the barriers why they don't. Where Vienna wants to actually become, in its staff composition, a mirror of the Vienna population with its very diverse backgrounds, which we really like and want to look at as a wealth, as a richness, and as a potential that can be of a big advantage for the whole society, not only the individuals. But it's a very long way to go. We don't have a legal obligation in the law to do this. It's very much on a practical level, and we also have installed a monitoring process to see what is being done in the departments and what changes there are over the years, called the diversity monitoring. Have developed a diversity scorecard and are now going into the second round of reporting about the measures that the city of Vienna is doing and seeing whether it's working and where it's working and what additional support has to be given. We then entered into a very lively discussion on various aspects of anti-discrimination and diversity policies. One of the questions was the diversity approach, which is a positive approach. How does it go together with the anti-discrimination legislation framework and the anti-discrimination laws that have rather a defensive, of course, approach and maybe seen as negative because they are reproachful, somebody has done something wrong. So my answer to that is that it really goes together and has to go together. You have to have strong and clear standing on anti-discrimination and equality policies in order to have a good diversity approach and an efficient one and a credible one, I would say, because a very socially unequal society can't really be celebrated. So we talked about employer behavior, where the role of names, foreign-sounding names, language accents may play a role in hiring procedures, how to deal with that. Is it a matter of discrimination or not? We talked about other measures that can be taken in the field of diversity, especially on the local level. There's many. We talked about what does it mean for schools. And then a very, very important question was asked in the end. Do all these, or does MIPEX, with all its very valid and very important results, reach the public, reach the immigrants, reach the people that are concerned mostly by all these policies? What can we do that it reaches everybody? And what about participation of immigrants in all these areas, which is one of the most urgent needs and is maybe also part, or not maybe, certainly part of political participation overall. It's a type of civic and very important participation, for example, to be able to work in the public administration.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you all commentators for bringing to the floor the different aspects of your discussions in the breakout sessions. I don't know whether there is still a bit of time for one or two questions. If someone from the room would like to ask a question, or if one of the commentators maybe wants to comment on one or more of their colleagues. If not, well. Doris wants to add something she forgot, so here you go, Doris.
We had quite an interesting discussion, not in depth yet, but also with regard to what do we need to be regulated at EU level, how much harmonization do we need in these fields, and what should be better done at the national or regional levels. And that, I think, relates perhaps a bit to how much framework do we need also in the field of anti-discrimination, and then also to have diversity developed at a local level. But again, also that was brought up by Selma, that the anti-discrimination legislation in the Czech Republic was decided with the clear stipulation: we only do that because we need to do that because of the EU, we don't want it. So there was quite some resistance, including then also in state authorities, and what one can do there and how to balance it, while at the same time it's clear that we also need a more harmonized approach in quite many policy areas, because there is already a legislative framework in some areas. So that is a bit of an open debate. It's not something where we were quite clear on all aspects, but I think that is an important one, I believe, also on national levels, particularly as many governments currently say we have enough EU law, we don't need that anymore. And to be very honest, I don't think that this would be a helpful solution, because all the restrictive measures are already harmonized at EU level, like return policy and removals and so on, while access is not. And that is a debate I would hope could be had more openly as well.
Okay, thank you, Doris. I see one more question, if possible.
In our workshop on anti-discrimination and diversity, one of the things which also came up, which we didn't have time to elaborate, was the role of the Commission, and how Commission can use its power, whatever it has, to convince the member states to live up to those expectations and those demands which the directives have. For example, one of the most important thing is that national governments, equality body, they should work together with NGOs, and it's recommended actually, which they don't do that. So it's a pity that the representation from Commission was not here. Otherwise, we could have asked them a lot of questions, because in the end, they have a very important role to play.
Okay, thank you for that addition. And I think we have to conclude here because of time restraints. Thank you very much.